I had been inspired by MennoFolk Ontario, which was a thing, right? So it wasn't my idea in any way. But it was also in that setting where I knew lots of people who were doing music outside the church, right? Who were connected to church in church context, but were playing in the bars, whatever. And there was never going to be a space for a lot of those folks to make music in a church setting. And so we thought, well, why can't we do something? We heard that Mennonites in Ontario were doing this thing, so we thought we could try it. We didn't actually contact them and get any information, so we did our own thing. We worked pretty hard to try to establish it so it would be a thing right away. Like, we had artists who were playing professionally, close the evening, but it was a whole day. It was like right from 11 till 10. It's a long day.
The American MennoFolk was definitely a more folk-based thing. I know at the Winnipeg MennoFolks we've had metal and bands playing and all variety of music. It's often mostly acoustic type music, but in the States it was primarily, that was the dominant thing. There might have been a few high school kids who were like, yeah, we're gonna rock out, and but for the most part it was very acoustic.
And we had the big backdrop, like we just wanted it to feel legit in a way. And our only reference point for legit was the Folk Fest. So
I think I even rode my bike out there. It was a fun day. There was really good attendance. It was a lot of just visiting and connecting with people, you know, that we knew. It's like, oh, I didn't know you played this, and oh, that's so great. You guys have a good sound, and things like that. You know, you're sort of experiencing things about people you kind of know, but you don't. This is just one more aspect to them that sort of reveals of their personality, of their life to you. You know.
It was actually the second year, I think, we moved. The weather wasn't good, so we moved inside the barn, and there was a band from Westgate, mostly Westgate students, who ripped it up. They did "Sweet Child of Mine," and nailed the solo, and the guitar player was like doing the solo, and he fell off the stage. Like, this was totally like onto the bales, and it was like, oh, this is Spinal Tap. This is fabulous.
I think I remember Daryl calling me up and asking me if I'd be on the new MennoFolk committee. I think they were looking to pass it on to new blood. I think it was my second year that we moved it to the West End Cultural Center, and then moved it to winter as well, I believe. I don't remember having a theme. We would mainly just we would just try to find people who were Mennonite, who were in bands or performers, and then occasionally there was the one guy who did I don't think it was technically stand-up. I think he was considered, he'd been a fringe performer, so it was like a one-man show. And we expanded to visual arts, so we had, like, there would be paintings we'd hang up around the wall. I think that's how that first started. We would hang up paintings around the wall, and had an auction, a silent auction, I think, for those. I still have one of those in my office, actually, a painting I won at the first MennoFolk, I think, that we had art. But it went from more clearly housed within Mennonite Church and connected to Mennonite Church Manitoba denominational structure, to less connected, I think, with that transition. And I think with our MennoFolk committee, there were more people who identified more loosely with Mennonite Church and with Mennonite faith, and so more and more it became people with sort of looser ethnic ties, Mennonite ethnic tie. Like, Mennonite became sort of defined as much by Mennonite background as it did by being connected to churches. It wasn't like a shock that there were lots of people who identified as Mennonite but weren't really going to church anymore, and probably were never going to, but wanted to be a part of Mennonite things, and wanted to get together and have Mennonite events. Like, it felt very natural to everything that was going on, and the way the attitudes my peers had about church. But it also felt like it was kind of, at least to me, felt like this was the first time it was actually, like, it was happening. It wasn't, yeah. My memory was that in the next iteration, it started to feel more like a CMU in-house, like, it probably wasn't necessarily better or worse, but I remember feeling a little critical, like, hey, we tried to, like, gather in, like, we had lots of people, like, we tried to spread the net a little wider. But at the same time, I think the band I most associated with that was Secondhand Pants, and they're amazing. So I think I just didn't totally get their humor at first, and I was like, what is this stupid CMU inside joke? But now I love them, so I take it all back.
I was involved in 2006, 2007, and 2008, maybe 2005, I'm not sure. And 2006 was actually a pretty ambitious year for MennoFolk. It was 3 days. Typically before that it had been 2. So there was an art opening, I believe at A Label for Artists was the name of the gallery downtown. Then that was the Friday night. Then Saturday afternoon in the Blau Rock Cafe, there was 3 musical performances, I believe. And then it ended on the Sunday night at the West End Cultural Center. For 2007, I believe it was just at A Label for Artists and the West End Cultural Center. And the theme was Martyrs and Monsters, I believe. And I forget, this is like a quiz show or something. But I just always remember having a lot of fun being on the committee with people that I respected and admired and was also friends with. And like having lots of meetings at Cousins, that's where we would typically meet to plan it in the months leading up to it. And as a tweener, so one of the acts in between the main acts at the West End Cultural Center, I, along with 2 friends, performed Straight Outta North Kildonan, which is a rap song that I wrote in grade 10. And we had performed it in 2000, like Aaron and the Apostles in the barn, like I was telling you about. But this was just me and 2 friends. So it was my cousin Joey was doing a beatbox. And then my brother Thomas was kind of like the hype man. So he would just kind of like, and I think he may have even had a clock. And like we wore baggy hoodies and baggy jeans. And it was a lot of fun just performing that as a tweener. That stands out for me as a highlight. And I think you can still listen to the song on the MennoFolk website, so I encourage people to check it out. On a mission from God to lay the smack down, so get up, stand up, come on, make some noise, move to the beat of some Mennonite boys. Straight out North Kildonan, North Kildonan.
I don't know, it was a nice, because we always thought that MennoFolk was very cool, and it was like all the cool people were involved in MennoFolk, and it was like this amazing, you know, art showcase thing that I didn't really know too much about, but I just saw the people that were on the committee and had very, you know, high praise for all of them, and they were all so interesting and artistic, and to think that they would want me to be an interesting artistic person was a pretty cool thing back when little Jody was, you know. Yeah.
It was interesting because it almost felt cool to be a Mennonite actually at it, where we were sort of celebrating, I don't know, eating our Mennonite foods, hearing different Mennonite bands. I think part of it too is that it was an older crowd. I was young at that time, and just seeing them celebrate those things and see all the art and the amazing talent of Mennonites, that was really cool for me. And I've always sort of been a creative person, and that was a place where I felt like I could showcase some things and feel proud of it almost. So that was really cool. Yeah, the first year I submitted art was, I think, in 2009, after I moved to Winnipeg, and my sister was on the committee at that point. So I heard about it there and went to it and thought it was the coolest thing ever, and then I wanted to join a couple years later. Yeah.
I was kind of the baby when I first started, and I was like the CMU attendee, you know, and then there was all these like older cool people, and I was kind of like, hey guys. For a lot of the artists that submit their art, this might be the first time their art is in a show, and so that will bring out a lot of their family or their friends, or yeah. It was really neat to get to mingle with all sorts of different people, and with the younger folks, or like my friends, or the older folks, and it was just kind of the place where everyone was, and you just got to hang out, and it was something that everyone looked forward to, and didn't really matter what age you were or who you were, and you could all just go and have a great time.
The vision was always about how can we highlight these amazing Mennonite artists and musicians that some people know about, but there's actually, like, there's tons. And so it was always about that. How do we highlight that well? How do we make it inclusive? Or also trying to find a theme that isn't too difficult for people to feel like, oh, I don't really have anything to submit for that. So that was always the balance of trying to do something really fun and creative while also allowing people to do things and, yeah, to submit things. So.
Having these artists or people that maybe don't even know they're an artist yet, but they just see that and they're like, I know that, like, oh, I totally relate to this theme. I'm gonna take a picture and submit it, or I'm gonna draw a picture, or I'm gonna make a sculpture, or I don't know. And anybody, it's so non-judgmental, and it's so, there's no assumptions as to what your connection to this culture is, just that you're a part of it. And I think that's pretty cool. I remember specifically when we had the Show Me Your Taboo theme. And there was this woman sent her art in from like Ontario or something. And there was these, I think, maybe I'm mixing up stories, but this is how I remember it. It was that there was these big pieces of art, and it was like based on a true story of this like, I don't even know who it was, but there was a peeping Tom, and it was like based on this like peeping Tom. It was just, I don't know, and like I feel like that we would never have gotten these like massive paintings of this, you know, of this true story about this peeping Tom. I just thought that one was so interesting, and that was really cool. I think it's important to celebrate heritage, whether you identify as this heritage or not, because there's not a lot of cultures that are like that have the faith base and the cultural base. And I think that's a really neat thing, to be able to celebrate that and bring these people together.
Yeah, so it's good. It's these connections that form between the artists, so you can learning what people can do in these instances, and you can say, hey, I got an idea, and let's collaborate on this now, either musically or visual, with the visual arts. After I had, Matt and I had the photos at the MennoFolk thing there that I saw, Claire Schellenberg had woodblock prints there, and that's very, works very well with the kind of sheet metal rusting images that I do. And so, you know, we formed a collaboration there and made a giant permanent cross for the CMU chapel, made from this image of a block print of a tree that Claire came up with, and really happy with how that turned out as well.
MennoFolk, yeah, it was a place where I was able to talk about those creative things, meet with other creative people, and that's always been an important part of my faith as well, sort of creativity. So that was definitely a good outlet for me. Because the event is about the music and art, I think that's always was at the forefront. And so I think that in and of itself sort of crossed those binaries or lines where we tend to place people in, whether you're MB or G, you know what I mean? That part didn't matter. And it was sometimes that awkward thing of what is it about someone for them to identify as Mennonite in order for them to submit an art piece or whatever. And we tried to be flexible with that. They didn't just have to have a last name, Ence or whatever. They had to, I don't know, try to really engage with the theme. And so we were quite open to that. But I think MennoFolk was always sort of being about celebrating the arts, music, I keep saying celebrating. So I think that was the most important part though, rather than sort of those lines or those things that differentiate us.
It's who we are, and it's the stuff that we're doing that makes it our culture, I guess. And faith certainly can play an aspect into the creation of this. I think it could be neither and both. I think we could have absolute Mennonite people who identify themselves as Mennonite, both culturally or ethnically, culturally or religiously. Could be expressing themselves in ways that don't relate to that at all. It's just, they are who they are, so it's sort of back there. But I mean, the tree that Claire and I, or the permanent cross with the tree that Claire and I created for the CMU chapel, I mean, that was certainly imagery that we created as a faith, especially specifically Mennonite faith imagery. But I think on a day-to-day basis, we are just who we are, and we do the art and music that comes to us. So.
Sort of the walls of the church don't define things the way they used to, even probably in the 90s. So I think it's awesome that there's a sense of breadth and expression that's empowered. And I'm kind of guessing that by its very definition, it still puts bounds on what happens there, right? There's still some sort of, so whether you're cultural or not, you make assumptions about what Mennonite is and what's going to be appropriate for this event. So I think that's still interesting. I think it still comes from a church expression of some sort. Like, I don't think it's completely unrelated to a faith expression. But to the extent to which I wish we had spaces for people to create music that were faith expressions explicitly, I don't know if this is it anymore.
So I kind of want to ask you that question to find out what MennoFolk's about now. I mean, these questions are really cliche now, about like tension between religious and ethnic Mennonite identity, you know, as you know from class. This was like the music event for a new kind of Mennonite identity that was among people who were uncomfortable with well, whatever, weren't in church. Sometimes because they were uncomfortable, sometimes because they felt really critical of it, sometimes just because they didn't feel connected. I've always felt at home with that crowd, but a little bit critical too of like, we can do this with this generation. We can find our community outside the church, but we can. We need to admit then that we're the last. Like we're spending all the capital we've built up. Like all this sense of community and connection we have to each other is because of these really intentional church-centered gatherings that our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents participated in. It's sort of prodigal son, right? Like take your inheritance and go have a music festival. So. But that sounds way harsher than I mean it to be on. Like, yeah, I love those folks, and I think those folks pushed important boundaries. And like, I struggled with some of the rigidness of the church at that time too. And I don't think it only grew in ways I needed it to grow because I was staying involved in pushing. I think it grew because there were other parents and grandparents in the church who had kids who were pushing even more radically and leaving. So I don't want to dump on folks either who weren't or aren't as church involved. But
when I first started with MennoFolk, I found that faith element. I was like, where is it really? Like, sure, we're celebrating Mennonite art and music, but it was interesting that in a way, with me being on the committee, I felt like a lot of my Mennonite values were embodied by just being on the committee, of meeting with people I didn't normally meet with who also happened to be Mennonite, and for us to talk about themes and what does it mean to be a Mennonite and how does that connect to what artists are doing right now. So those conversations were really life-giving for me, and a reason why I also continue to stay on the committee. But yeah, I think MennoFolk at its best is just trying to pull in everyone that goes beyond those clusters and bubbles and normal places that Mennonites tend to meet, whether that's church or CMU or whatever. It's just an evening to celebrate. So
it is what it needs to be at the moment, you know, and it'll be different again in 10, 20 years from now. Hopefully. It'll still be here like, 10, 20 years from now. We need a lot of people to come and take it on and move it forward. But yeah, it's possible, and I think it's very likely.